welcome to Brewsers, a podcast about beer, coffee, booze, and bruisers. I'm your host, Roddy John, and today we talk to Mike Quakenbush. We talk all about his journey into pro wrestling, Shikara, and Jushin Thunder Liger. That is right, we got Mike Quakenbush on the show. This was such a big, I was so happy to have him on the show because I loved Shikara. I loved everything they were doing. We'll get into it in the interview, but I saw them live in Chicago only once when they did a show with Ring of Honor, and I love everything about Shikara, so we're going to get into it. But first, make sure to sign up for our newsletter. It comes out twice a week. You get even more information about our guests. You get fun facts, and you get to find out what's happening with your favorite podcast, all about beer, coffee, booze, and bruisers. So without further ado, here is Mike Quakenbush. I would like to welcome to the show Mike Quakenbush. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing quite well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So for those listening right now, can you kind of paint us a word picture? Where are you at? What's going on around you?
Where am I at? Well, yeah, I'll try my very best here. I live just about an hour outside the city of Philadelphia in an idyllic little suburb. Moments before we started, there was a very noisy Memorial Day parade that I thought was going to ruin this recording. So it was all the emergency vehicles and a whole lot of marching bands. So, if I happen to be drinking something that's double strong this morning, well, that is why.
I mean, it is a holiday as we're recording, so you are perfectly fine to, obviously do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Within the law, obviously.
Of course.
Of course. Yeah. Let's go all the way back in time real fast. What is your earliest memory of pro wrestling?
It's funny that you ask. I guess there's kind of two answers. Probably the more compelling of them is this. So in the sleepy little suburb where I grew up of West Lawn, Pennsylvania, so sleepy, it doesn't even exist anymore.
Oh, really?
It got, absorbed into a township. So now there's no post office, I think is what that basically means.
Okay.
Across the street from me, and we're going to full name this kid, Kyle Buskowski. Kyle Buskowski's family used to get the Big Four pay-per-views back when there were only the Big Four, Rumble, Mania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like all the neighborhood kids would come over. Now, this is the 80s, or peak Hulkamania period.
Right.
So there's the appeal of that, but there's also the appeal of free pizza at Kyle Buskowski's house. So this brings people in. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't into wrestling, but I was into free pizza. Mm-hmm. And I thought all the other neighborhood kids are going over to Kyle's house. Let's see what's going on. And when I got there, the main event on that particular night was Hulk Hogan against the Ultimate Warrior.
Oh.
So we're talking WrestleMania 6.
Yeah, 6.
And, oh, man, I thought this was so boring. And I'm looking around. I'm like, is this what you guys are into? They're just locking fingers and shaking their arms.
Multiple times.
For a really long time. But everybody seems to be losing their minds.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is not for me. So, I don't know, a year or two goes by. One night after, it's a Saturday night, and the reruns of the A-Team and Knight Rider are over for the day. And I'm flipping channels, and I land on a Turner-owned station where they happen to be showing WCW Saturday Night.
Right.
And walking to the ring is Jushin Thunder Liger with this mask with crazy horns. Uh-huh. He's got like a vest with a huge flowing silver cape. He gets in the ring and he's doing flips. He flies out of the ring. And I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
It didn't even connect in my mind. That is what you saw at Kyle's house, just through a very different lens.
Right.
But once I saw Liger, I thought, I don't know what that job is because, I don't know, I'm in 9th grade maybe at the time. But I was like, I want that job. Like my dad's job, I think, is quite boring. But the thing with the cape and the mask, I want to do that.
I can get into that, yes. Jushin, I think it was Liger versus Pillman I happened to see when I was a kid. But it was years later because I, only grew up with WWF. And then Dustin Runnels or Dustin Rhodes, I was flipping through channels myself. I'll show my age. I was like, Dustin Runnels, what is he doing here? And I, pull out the TV guide. I'm like, all right, it's Saturday this time. What the hell is a WCW? So eventually I just kept watching because yes, there's more wrestling. I don't have to wait until the next time WWF comes on. And at one
Did
time,
you
go ahead.
when you found that out,
Yeah.
did you discover beyond WWF and WCW that there was anything else in your area as well, or was
Yes.
that all you had access to?
So I had access to, I mean, it wasn't the Von Erich, world class here in
Mm.
DFW, but it was the aftermath. It was like global. And so I had
Oh
that because that
yeah,
was from the Sportatorium as well.
right.
And I got to watch that and Iceman King Parsons and,
Mhm.
Chris Adams and all this. I was like, this is even better. I never went, unfortunately, time machine. If we all had one, certain things we would do, go to the
Right.
Sportatorium and watch, local wrestling. Who wouldn't want that? That building doesn't exist anymore. It's like your town doesn't even exist anymore.
Right. Yeah, I remember we used to get Global on
Oh,
ESPN every
wow.
afternoon after school.
Yeah.
So if you hustled home fast enough, you could catch Global.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Finding out there's more wrestling out there once you already love wrestling,
Mm.
it's like there's more candy stores. I didn't know there could even be possible.
There was some local indie company that would be on like cable channel 9 million up
Mm,
here. They only came on Saturday nights at 1 a.m. So if
wow.
you could wait until Saturday Night Live was over
Yeah.
and you flip and you knew what channel it was on, you could watch IWCCW, which
Jesus.
always had like 10 fans and that was it. And the main event was always Jimmy Snuka against somebody.
Well,
And it was all fairly lousy. But you're right, because it was like there's more wrestling to consume, I have to
right.
stay up.
Yeah. And then I imagine you had a little bit better access because the Northeast has always been such a fantastic place for not only local pro wrestling, but access to international wrestling. Because I mean, you guys are so close to Canada as well. How much of, I guess, which other country did you get first? Was it Mexico? Was it Canada? Was it England? Was it Japan? What kind of came across your radar while you were up there?
So I was still in high school when I became aware that tape trading
Oh,
was a
yeah.
way to discover wrestling in other countries. So, there were companies that they would have a monthly catalog with all the newest stuff that they got.
Uh-huh.
There was a guy out of Virginia I used to order Japanese tapes from. And when you first discover that, right? I think it's a lot like when you get to that part of your life as a kid where you want to discover your own musical tastes
Hmm.
beyond what your parents listened to. So, when I was at home, I knew who John Denver was because my dad listened to John Denver. I knew the Sound of Music soundtrack because my mom listened to the Sound of Music soundtrack. But when you go into a music store for the first time on your own, you realize there's this universe of
Yes.
music and you almost don't know where to start. It's baffling, right? There's these other genres like what's prog rock?
Right.
Do I like prog rock? Do
Yeah.
I? I don't know. And I felt that way when I would pick out of the wrestling VHS catalog. Like if
Mm,
somebody's name sounded cool,
mm,
I mean, what else do you have to go by?
right.
So I always felt like, and if you're of this generation, I'm sure you feel similarly. When the package would come in the mail, it was wrestling Christmas
Yes.
because the matches in there could be mind blowing. They could expand your imagination,
Mhm.
or they could be rotten. It could be a pair of Argyle socks, but you couldn't wait to rip it open and find out what was in there.
Yeah.
And through that process, right, you just start discovering because on this Japanese tour, oh, guess what? There's this, there's a German wrestler, and you know what? That German wrestler, he's the father of Alex Wright, who's on
Yeah.
WCW. But now I can trace him back here,
Hmm.
and you just start going down those rabbit holes and discovering this is what I like, and I'm not ordering any more of those.
Right. Why expand in that part of the universe? And I don't like that part of the universe. So I'm just going to focus on this right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that often I feel like uh, there's always a danger, to I think swimming too deep in wrestling social media. If
Hmm.
you do this, you're going to find people, man, they want to pick arguments. They
Yes.
hate this thing that you love.
Hmm.
Man, they want to ruin your day. There is so much wrestling that's awesome.
Yes.
If you hate some kind of wrestling, don't watch it. There's so much other stuff. And you and I don't have to like the exact same stuff. And
Right.
yet I should be able to tell you why I love the thing I love and
Exactly.
listen to you tell me why you love what you love. And we don't need to fight about it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, right, there's more awesome wrestling than not.
Yes.
And, if you want to laugh at the stuff that's not, we have Botchamania.
Exactly. I mean, as well, because I've told this to so many people that if I were growing up now with the access to pro wrestling, I wouldn't have friends probably outside the internet. I would be incredibly socially awkward because I wouldn't leave the house because I have
Yeah.
access to literally any bit of wrestling I ever want to know. If I want to know what Toledo, Ohio pro wrestling looks like, I could look it up and figure it out what companies are around there, what runs, and then be like, oh, perfect. I love watching the same 15 people in a bar and wrestling on a regular basis, or GCW, or any of the bigger companies, or even like the semi small. Because like trying to find like you could, like you said, the rabbit hole of you go from a WWE maybe to an AEW, and you go further down, further down, further down until you're watching the 15 people in Toledo, Ohio, and that's mind blowing to you because you're just on the super micro level as opposed to a giant macro level, which we have now with all these other giant pro wrestling companies.
Right. It's very much like, listening to top 40 radio in the car,
Mm-hmm.
but then discovering that obscure local band that you
Yes.
love and buy the t-shirt of and go every time that they're playing some local concert.
Right.
Growing up, I was a huge fan of this very wacky Brooklyn duo, They Might Be Giants.
Oh, yes.
The fact that they remained relatively obscure forever, I think, is great. Like, I love that about them. I never want to hear them on top 40 radio. And sometimes I want to enjoy wrestling that is also that way, right? It's so niche. I feel like there's 50 people who watch this and it's
Mm-hmm.
only us who watch it. And other times I want to listen to top 40 radio and
Yes.
everything in between. But I really related to what you just said a moment ago, John, about that idea of if the access to wrestling that we have today was
Mm-hmm.
available to me when I was an out of control super fan in the early 90s, I would never leave my house.
Yes.
I would have no friends or relationships. And I mean, I'm not here to tell you I'm the most socially developed human
Right.
being on the planet, but I'd be several kilometers behind if I had spent forever holed up. And think about like a week, like the week we're having between
Mm-hmm.
WWE,
Uh-huh.
AEW, New Japan. There'll be more wrestling made this week than any human could watch if it was their full time job.
Exactly.
But when you're like a college age or high school kid with nothing but time and
Mm-hmm.
desperate to avoid doing your trigonometry, oh man, there's more AEW to watch.
Yes. Yeah. And then now you go even further down the rabbit holes with vlogs and everything like that that's on YouTube, or, as much wrestling content like this podcast that you could consume, or multiple podcasts you've done. And so yeah, it's the best time to be a wrestling fan. And I think it's the best time to be associated with the wrestling industry in general.
I'm curious to know what you think about this.
Okay.
I think a real paradigm shift that's happened as well in wrestling is that many times the meta narrative is more exciting than the narrative. There's the angles that we
Mm.
see on TV, and that is the story, the narrative they're selling you. But
Mhm.
oftentimes it's the meta narrative you see on social media that becomes
Yes.
far more interesting. Like, oh, these two people are actually friends
Right.
outside of wrestling. That's really interesting. I think, two people who cut their teeth working under me, Angelo Parker and Ruby Soho from
Yes.
AEW.
Yeah.
Uh, People became much more interested in the meta narrative of them outside of wrestling. And
Right.
then it was really incumbent on AEW to find a way to weave that in or get left out of all the excitement. And I think a key way in which wrestling has changed in the last 10, 12 years as the social media era really supplanted the cable TV era is the rise of the meta narrative being as valuable as the
Mm.
narrative.
Right. And then it does weave into the, swerving the internet because you actually are thinking ahead and scripting everything out to where you have these little things happening. So, like, so I didn't know that they were actually dating in real life. I just thought that they were just randomly doing things on screen. And then she ends up being pregnant. I was like, oh, I guess they really are dating. And then they just happen to get married I think it's this past weekend,
Right?
because the pictures I'm seeing, I was like, oh, all of that was completely real. And they were, like you just said, they weaved it in there. So for people
Mm-hmm.
who aren't as into the social media aspect of it, and just be like, okay, what is the story they're telling us on the screen? And sometimes you might catch certain things if they're big enough on your social media radar to know that they